My name is Delaney Marsh. I'm 31 years old, and 2 weeks before my wedding, my mother walked into my spare bedroom, opened her purse, pulled out a pair of fabric shears, and cut my wedding dress open. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She set the scissors down on my dresser afterward, the way you'd set down a pen after signing a form, and she told my sister, who was standing in the corner, shaking, that I would calm down. I want you to hold that image for a second. Not the cut, not the dress, her face. Because that's the part that 200,000 people couldn't stop talking about. Not the destruction, the calm. I'll get there. I promise I'll get there. But first I need you to understand where this story actually starts, because it doesn't start in that bedroom. It starts in a house in East Knoxville, Tennessee, with a woman who made cookies for sick neighbors and read Bible verses at the dinner table, and who rationed love the way some people ration money, carefully, strategically, always with an awareness of the balance. Before I keep going, if you're already feeling something, if something about that image is sitting in your chest in a way that feels familiar, I need you to hit that like button right now and subscribe so you don't miss where this goes. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because I think a lot of us have been in rooms where the most dangerous thing wasn't the loudest person. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up the middle child. Older sister Bree, younger sister Cora, and me, Delaney, in the middle, which I think tells you everything you need to know before I say another word. Bree learned early that the way to survive our mother was to agree with her. Cora learned to go quiet. I learned to hold my ground, which sounds like a compliment until you understand what it costs a child to do that at 7 years old. At 10. At 14, every single time. My mother, Patrice, was, and I want to be careful here because this matters, she was genuinely warm to everyone outside our house. I mean that. She brought casseroles to families going through hard times. She knew every neighbor's birthday. She hugged people at church with her whole body. And then she would come home and tell me that the project I'd spent a month on was uneven, that I should have asked for help. She would find the one thing I made with my hands, out of pure want, just for the love of making something, and she would locate the flaw in it with the precision of someone who had been practicing for years. When I was 13, I made her a quilt for her birthday. 4 months of secret work. Fabric scraps I'd been collecting. I gave it to her before anyone else woke up because I wanted that moment to be just ours. She looked at it. She said, "It's uneven. You should have had someone help you." She set it on the kitchen counter and went to make coffee. I never sewed anything again. Not for 14 years. The thing about that kind of correction is that it doesn't feel like abuse when you're inside it. It feels like standard. It feels like the normal friction of being someone who isn't quite good enough. And because the person telling you that also brings casseroles to sick families, you believe them. You think, well, if someone that loving sees a flaw in me, the flaw must be real. I believed that for a long time. What I didn't believe, what I was never allowed to believe, was that my needs were the same weight as other people's. That my preferences mattered without needing to be justified. That I could want something just because I wanted it, without owing anyone an explanation. If you've ever been made to feel like your needs were the inconvenient ones, like you were the easy one precisely because nobody was paying attention to you, I think you already understand everything that's coming. And I think you know exactly what it costs to be that person. Leave me a comment and tell me where you're watching from right now and what time it is there. I read every single one, I really do. So I grew up the way you do. I got into the University of Tennessee on a partial scholarship, which I supplemented with student loans and a part-time job at the campus print shop, where I learned that I genuinely liked the smell of ink and the logic of design. I studied graphic design because it was the one thing that was both creative and practical enough that no one could tell me it wasn't serious. I graduated in 3.5 years. I called my mother from the parking lot of the registrar's office after I submitted my final paperwork, and she asked if I'd remembered to send my Aunt Carol a birthday card. I had, actually. I always had. I moved to Nashville. I got a job at a branding agency and I worked until my fingerprints were more callous than print. I was good at it, genuinely good. The kind of good that your colleagues notice before your boss does. I built a freelance client list on the side. I paid down debt in chunks that felt meaningful. None of this was dramatic. It was just the steady accumulation of a life that was mine, built with my own hands, and it felt like the most important thing I had ever done. My mother told people I worked in computers. I dated a man named Tyler for 3 years in my mid-20s because he was emotionally avoidant in a way that felt comfortable, in a way that felt like home, if I'm being honest. When I realized that, I ended it. I spent 2 years alone on purpose. I read a lot, I cooked badly and improved. I figured out what I actually liked, separate from what I had been told to like, which is a stranger project than it sounds when you're 26 and doing it for the first time. And then I met Joel. Joel Whitfield is 34 years old and he co-owns a small residential construction company, and he showed up to the event where I met him with sawdust on his right forearm that he either didn't notice or didn't care about. And when I pointed it out, he looked at it and said, "Yeah, that tracks," and brushed it off and kept talking. Not self-conscious, not performing humility, just fine, just settled. I didn't know how much I needed someone settled until I was standing next to one. Joel comes from a loud, warm family in Franklin, Tennessee, the kind of family where conflict is short and repair is fast and nobody keeps tallies. He has no real framework for what my family is. When I have tried to explain it, I can see him working to understand, not dismissing it, actually working, and coming up short not because he doesn't care, but because his brain genuinely doesn't have the filing system for it. That used to frustrate me. It doesn't anymore. When I introduced Joel to my mother at dinner in the 3rd month we were dating, she spent 45 minutes asking him questions about his business, and then, in the car afterward, told me he seemed like someone who peaked in high school. He had a master's degree in structural engineering. She hadn't asked a single question about me the entire night. Cora called me the next morning. "I just want you to know," she said, "that I think he's wonderful, like genuinely." And then she paused and said, "She's going to make this hard." I knew. I had always known. I just didn't know yet how hard was actually going to get. The engagement was 14 months long, and I am not going to walk you through all of it, because some of it is just the ordinary grind of planning a wedding while managing a mother who treated a $3,000 contribution like a majority stake in a company she didn't own. What I'll tell you is that by the time we were 2 weeks out, I was carrying a particular kind of exhaustion. Not the normal stress of centerpieces and seating charts, but the specific weight of performing gratitude I didn't feel. Of saying "thank you for your input, Mom," to a woman who had contested every vendor, questioned every choice, and mentioned her financial contribution 17 times across phone calls I had started dreading. What kept me steady, genuinely, was the dress. I had taken a bridal sewing class 2 years before the engagement, a small private act of reclamation I never fully explained to anyone. At 27, for the first time since I was 13 years old, I sat down at a machine with fabric in my hands and I made something. When Joel proposed, I already knew what I wanted. I worked with a seamstress named Diane who drove 40 minutes each way and who told me, the first time she saw my sketches, "This is a real dress. This has bones." Ivory Duchess satin, French seams, hand-stitched, fitted bodice with covered buttons running the length of my spine, a chapel train that was simple and clean and entirely, completely mine. It was hanging on the back of my spare bedroom door the morning my mother came to see it. Cora got there first. She always did. She showed up at 8:15 with 2 coffees and her yellow sweatshirt and that particular energy she has when she's trying to make something feel normal by sheer force of warmth. I heard her key in the lock. I'd given her a copy 6 months ago, mostly because she's the only person I trust to water my plants when I travel. And then she was in the kitchen, and I was already walking toward her, and we didn't say much. We just stood there in the morning quiet with our coffees and let it be a good day for a few minutes, before it had to be anything else. She saw the dress before I even led her to it. The door to the spare bedroom was open, and the morning light was coming through the window at that particular low angle it gets in October in Nashville, and the satin caught it in a way that made the whole room look like it was holding its breath. Cora stopped walking. She set her coffee down on the hallway table without looking at it. "Dell," she said. Just that. Just my name, in the voice she uses when something is bigger than words. I reached past her and held the back panel open so she could see the hand stitching along the seam. 14 months of evenings. Diane's hands in mine, both of us bent over a cutting table in her basement studio, and all of those hours were visible if you knew where to look. Cora reached out and touched the fabric very lightly with 2 fingers, the way you touch something you're afraid of disturbing. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes out when you've been holding something tightly for a long time and someone just sees it. "It's a dress," I said. "It's not a dress," she said. "It's an argument." I thought about that for a long time afterward. My mother arrived 40 minutes later. I heard her car in the driveway, that particular way she pulls in, a little fast, then corrects, and I felt my body do the thing it has always done. Not fear, not exactly. More like a kind of bracing, the way you adjust your footing before something heavy. She came in with a Tupperware container of snickerdoodles nobody had asked for, dressed in her rose floral blouse and her navy slacks, her silver blonde hair set perfectly, her mother's wristwatch on her left wrist. She looked the way she always looks in public, composed, generous, the woman who brings cookies. She said hello to Cora first, squeezed her arm, told her she looked tired, suggested vitamins, and then she walked directly to the spare bedroom, the way someone walks toward a thing they have already been thinking about. She stood in front of the dress for a long moment. The silence had a texture to it. I was watching her face. I know my mother's face the way you know a weather system. I have spent 31 years reading it, and what I saw in that moment was something I can only describe as assessment. Not wonder, not softness. Assessment. "You made this yourself," she finally said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement with a very particular weight at the end of it, the kind she's been making my entire life. The kind that sounds neutral until you've heard it enough times to understand what it's actually saying. "I worked with a seamstress on the construction," I said. "The design is mine." She nodded slowly. "Your grandmother's dress was just sitting in storage," I offered. "I know you did, Mom. I wanted something I designed." "Something you designed." She repeated it back to me. That specific move. I've seen it 1,000 times. She takes what you've just said and she gives it back to you slightly emptied out, like she's held it up to a light and found it wanting. And then she waits, because the move only works if you fill the silence, if you justify, if you explain yourself more fully until you've talked yourself into a corner. I didn't fill it. "Yes," I said. She looked at the dress for another moment. Then she said she needed to use the bathroom and she'd be right back, and she picked up her purse from where she'd set it on the floor, which I noticed but didn't register. Not yet. "I want to tell you what it feels like to watch someone you love, someone who is supposed to be the safest person in your life, become a threat in real time. There is this delay, this gap between what your eyes are seeing and what your brain will allow you to understand. Because the understanding requires you to accept something about that person that changes everything that came before it, and your brain is trying to protect you from that. Even then, even after all of it. I think a lot of you know exactly what I mean. I think a lot of you have stood in your own version of that room, watching someone you needed to be safe do something that wasn't safe, and felt that same delay, that same terrible suspension. Drop it in the comments. Tell me about the moment you realized, not the whole story, just that moment. The one where your brain finally caught up. I want to know, and I mean that, because I think those moments are the ones we carry longest and talk about least. Cora had started filming while my mother was out of the room. She told me later it was instinct. She had been making a slow pan of the dress for my phone, the kind of documentation a bridesmaid does without thinking, a memory in case you need it. The camera was just running. My mother came back into the room. She was holding her purse in her left hand, and in her right hand she was holding a pair of fabric shears. My fabric shears, I would realize later. The ones I kept in the craft drawer in my spare room. The ones Diane had helped me choose because the weight matters when you're cutting satin. She had gone into the bathroom, opened the cabinet door, found the hallway closet, gone through my drawers. She had been looking for them. The thing about understanding that in the moment is that you can't. You see the shears, you see your mother, you see the dress. And the combination of those three things is so far outside any category your mind has prepared for that the first second is just nothing. Just white. Then she spoke. "I'm going to take in the back panel. It's pulling. I can see it from here." Her voice was completely level, the same voice she uses to read a grocery list. "Mom, stop. Don't touch the dress." "I'm trying to help you. You don't want to walk down the aisle with it pulling across the back. The dress is not pulling. Do not touch it." I said it clearly. I said it without raising my voice because raising my voice has never once worked with her. It only gives her something to point to later, some evidence of my overreaction, my drama, my inability to accept help. I said it the way I have learned to say every hard thing to her, directly, without decoration, without a door left open. She stepped forward anyway. The sound of fabric shears through Duchess satin is very specific. It isn't a rip, it's cleaner than that. Decisive. One motion, 4 inches into the back seam of the bodice, right where Diane and I had spent an entire evening getting the tension exactly right. I stood there. I want to tell you how long the silence lasted, but I don't actually know. It felt like it lasted long enough for everything to reorganize itself. Long enough for some version of me that had been holding a door shut for 31 years to finally stop holding it. And then, quietly, I said, "Get out of my house." What happened next is the part that 200,000 people would eventually watch on their phone screens, in their cars, in their beds at night. Because Cora's phone was still running. And what the camera caught was not a fight. There was no screaming. There was no theatrical collapse. My mother set the shears down on my dresser. She said she was only trying to fix it. She said I was being dramatic. She said that if I had just used my grandmother's dress, none of this would have happened. She said all of this in the same level, pleasant voice, the same voice that asks neighbors how their grandkids are doing. I walked to the front door and I opened it. She left. She squeezed Cora's arm on her way out and said, "She'll calm down." The door closed, and I stood in my hallway in my sage green shirt with my hair still damp from the morning, and I felt something I had felt before. I had felt it at 13, standing in a kitchen holding a quilt while my mother made coffee, waiting for something that wasn't coming. That specific hollowness, that specific knowledge that the person who was supposed to look at something you made with your hands and say, "This is good, you are good," was not going to, had never been going to. Cora appeared in the hallway doorway. She wasn't saying anything. She was just standing there, and she was crying in the quiet way she cries when she's trying not to. I looked at her. I looked at the open bedroom door, where the dress was still hanging, the cut seam visible even from where I stood. Then I walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and I put my hands flat on the surface and I held them there. Not making a list, not organizing anything, just holding the only thing I could find to hold. Cora called me 3 times that night before I picked up. The first call I let go to voicemail because I was sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and I didn't have words yet. The second call I watched ring from across the room like it was happening to someone else. The third time I picked up because it was Cora, and she doesn't call 3 times unless it's real. She said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I said, "Okay." I was filming the dress. When Mom came back in, I wasn't trying to record anything. I was just making a video for you, like a memory thing. And then everything happened, and I didn't stop it, and Dell, I got all of it. I got the shears, I got what she said, I got the sound. I didn't say anything for a moment. I got her face, Cora said, when she set them down. I sat with that, the phone against my ear, the kitchen light too bright, the hum of the refrigerator the only other sound in the apartment. Don't post it, I said. I wasn't going to, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know who else to call. Don't post it, Cora. I know, she said. I know. I won't. We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes without saying much. That's a thing we've always been able to do. Exist together in silence without it meaning anything bad. At some point, she said she loved me, and I said I loved her back. And then we hung up, and I stayed on the kitchen floor for a while longer, and then I got up, and I ate half a sleeve of crackers standing at the counter, and I called Joel. He answered on the second ring, which is always how he answers when he sees my name. Hey, you okay? I told him. All of it. I had been editing the version of things I told Joel for months, smoothing the edges, minimizing the frequency, not wanting him to see me as someone who couldn't manage her own family. That night I stopped editing. I just told him the way it happened, in the order it happened, and when I got to the part about the sound, the shears through the satin, I heard him go completely quiet in the particular way he goes quiet when he is keeping himself very controlled. Where are you right now? He said. Kitchen floor. There was a pause. I'm coming over. You don't have to, Delaney. He was there in 22 minutes. He came in his work clothes, charcoal Henley, worn jeans, work boots, because he'd come from a job site and he hadn't stopped to change. He sat down on the kitchen floor next to me without asking whether I wanted him to. He didn't say anything about the dress for a long time. He just sat there. Eventually he said, "Can I see it?" We went to the spare room together. He stood in front of the dress and I watched his face and I saw the exact moment he understood what it had been before. The quality of it. The work in it. And then his eyes moved to the cut. 4 inches, clean, in the back seam, and his jaw tightened in a way I felt more than saw. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm going to call Diane in the morning." That was it. Not a speech, not a promise, just the next concrete thing, said quietly, by someone who was already thinking about what came after. I think about that moment more than I think about almost anything else from those 2 weeks. I woke up the next morning to my phone making sounds it doesn't normally make. That particular kind of continuous vibration, not calls, not texts, but something else. I picked it up and looked at it, and the number on the notifications didn't make sense to me at first. I thought I was misreading it. I set the phone back down. I picked it up again. 200,000 views. Cora had not posted it. I want to be clear about that because it matters, and because she has blamed herself for long enough. What Cora had done the night before, while she was still shaking and not knowing what to do with what she'd seen, was send the video to her best friend Meg with a message that said, "I don't know what to do. I can't stop shaking." Meg had watched it and sent it to 2 people. The third person had posted it without asking, without thinking, without knowing or maybe caring that there was a real wedding dress and a real woman and a real family behind the 37 seconds on their screen. By the time I woke up, it had a life of its own. I watched it. I sat in my bed with my knees pulled up and I watched a video of the worst moment of the previous day on a 4-inch screen, and I had the strange, dissociative experience of seeing myself from the outside. I could see my face, that 3-second gap after the sound of the shears. I could see what I looked like in those 3 seconds, and it was not what I expected. I expected to see shock. What I saw was something older than shock. Something that recognized this. And then I watched my mother set the shears down, and I heard her voice, level and clear. "She'll calm down." Here's the thing I could not have predicted, and the thing I think matters most to understanding why this particular video spread the way it did. It wasn't the violence of it that people couldn't stop watching. It was the calm. It was her voice. It was the complete and total absence of any indication that she understood what she had done. Because I think a lot of people, a lot of people who had never heard the phrase covert emotional abuse, who had never sat in a therapist's office and tried to explain why the thing that happened to them was hard when nothing dramatic ever happened, watched those 37 seconds and felt something recognize itself. Something in them said, that is the thing I could never describe. That specific tone, that specific reframing, the way harm gets administered in a completely reasonable voice, and then the person who experienced it is the one who needs to calm down. The comments were, I couldn't read them all. I couldn't read most of them. But I read enough to understand what was happening. People were sharing it in therapy forums, in family estrangement communities. Someone posted it with the caption, for everyone who ever tried to explain their mother to someone who didn't believe them. It had been shared in a private Facebook group for adult children of narcissistic parents, and then out of that group, and then further and further, until it reached people who had no context for any of it, and even they could feel that something was wrong with that calm. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. Have you ever had to explain to someone, a friend, a partner, a therapist, that the thing your family did wasn't dramatic, that there was never a smoking gun, that the damage was done quietly in a completely reasonable tone of voice? And have you ever watched someone not quite believe you because they were expecting something louder? Tell me in the comments. I think we need to say that out loud more than we do. I'll be reading. Bree called at 11:15 that morning. I saw her name on the screen and I took a breath and I answered. She didn't say hello. She said, "You need to get it taken down." "Good morning, Bree." "Don't. This is serious. Mom is getting... People are saying horrible things to her. She got a message last night that said, I didn't post it." A pause. "It doesn't matter. You can ask them. You can find whoever posted it and ask them to take it down, and this stops." "I don't know who posted it." "Then put something out. Say it's been taken out of context. Say it was a misunderstanding." I sat with that for a moment. Say it was a misunderstanding. I turned it over. I looked at it from all its sides. "She cut my wedding dress, Bree. She was trying to help and it went too far, and now strangers on the internet are making death threats over a family disagreement and you have the power to stop it." "It wasn't a family disagreement." "Delaney." "She walked into my house, went through my belongings to find my shears, and cut my dress, while I was standing there telling her not to." Silence. "She's your mother," Bree said finally. And her voice had shifted. The furious efficiency was gone, and what was underneath it was something that sounded, if I'm being honest, more like pleading. "She's our mother, and she's not okay right now. She needs this to stop." I understood in that moment what Bree was really saying. She wasn't defending what my mother had done. She couldn't, actually. There was video. What she was defending was the structure, the arrangement that had kept our family functional on the surface for 3 decades, the one where Patrice's behavior had consequences only within the family, contained, managed, invisible to anyone outside. Bree had built her entire life inside that structure. She needed it to hold. "I'm not getting it taken down," I said. "Not because I wanted my mother punished. I want to be clear about that. I had not posted the video. I had not wanted it public. But I was being asked, in that moment, to do the thing I had done my entire life. To reach out and quiet the evidence, to smooth the surface, to be the person who makes the damage disappear so that everyone else can go back to pretending. And I was 31 years old, and I was 2 weeks from my wedding, and my dress had a 4-inch cut in the back seam, and I was done. "This is your choice," Bree said. "It is," I said. She hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment and I listened to the refrigerator hum, and I thought about Cora saying it's not a dress, it's an argument. And I thought, yes. And I thought, maybe that's been true longer than either of us knew. Diane called me at 8 the next morning before I had gotten out of bed. I had met Diane Kowalski 18 months earlier through the bridal sewing class. She was the instructor, 61 years old, a former costume designer for a regional theater company who had pivoted to bridal work in her 50s, and who had the particular quality of someone who has spent decades making things beautiful under pressure and is completely unbothered by difficulty. She had a workroom in her basement in Brentwood with 2 dress forms and a cutting table, and a collection of threads organized by color family in a system she had developed herself and would not explain to anyone. She had looked at my sketches the first day and said, "This is a real dress, this has bones," and I had loved her immediately. Joel had called her the night before. He had not asked me first, which is the kind of thing that could go wrong but didn't, because Joel understands the difference between asking permission and wasting time. "I already looked at the video," she said without preamble. "Send me a photograph of the cut. I need to see the thread tension on either side." "Diane, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm telling you. Send me the photograph. I'll be there Thursday morning." She came Thursday morning. She drove 40 minutes each way, and she brought her own kit, and she worked on the dress for 4.5 hours while I sat in the hallway outside the spare room because I couldn't watch and couldn't leave. At one point, she called me in and showed me what she was doing, a technique she described with several French words I didn't retain, and I stood next to her and looked at the seam, and it was, already, becoming invisible. When she finished, she stood back and looked at the dress the way she always looks at finished work, level, critical, without sentiment. "Better," she said. Then she looked at me. "Structurally, this seam is now stronger than it was before she cut it. I want you to know that." I didn't cry in front of her. I waited until she was backing out of my driveway. The next 2 weeks moved in that particular way that weeks move when you are waiting for something enormous. Both very slowly and somehow all at once, so that when the day arrived, I could not account for where the time had gone. The video continued to circulate. I did not watch it again. I stopped reading the comments after the 3rd day, not because they were cruel, most weren't, but because reading them required me to hold the incident in my hands repeatedly, and I needed to set it down. Joel handled it with his characteristic straightforwardness. He did not suggest I get the video taken down. He did not offer opinions on what I should do about my mother. What he did was show up at my apartment on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday evenings and cook dinner, badly, enthusiastically, in the way of someone who learned to cook from watching a single YouTube video channel, and sit across from me at the kitchen table and talk about something else entirely. The project he was finishing in Germantown, a book he was reading about bridge engineering that he insisted was genuinely riveting. The fact that his best man had called 3 times about a rehearsal dinner logistical detail that Joel felt was being overcomplicated. He was giving me somewhere to put my attention that wasn't the wound. I understood that. I let it work. My father called once. Ron Marsh, who has spent 36 years being the weather vane in a house that only had one weather system. He called on a Wednesday evening, and when I answered, he said, "Hey, Bug," which is what he has called me since I was 4 years old, and the sound of it did something complicated to my chest. "Dad, He stopped, started again. "I saw the video." "I know." "I'm sorry," he said. I should have." He stopped again. He didn't finish the sentence. He hasn't finished that sentence my entire life, and I used to be angry about that. And standing in my kitchen 2 weeks before my wedding, I found that I wasn't angry anymore. I was just sad. There is a particular grief in watching someone know they failed you and not be able to find the words, and loving them anyway, and knowing the loving them is going to have to be enough because the words are not coming. "I know, Dad," I said. "You're going to have a beautiful wedding," he said. "I know." He came to the wedding. He walked me down the aisle. That part of the story is exactly what it should have been. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5:47 and lay in the dark for a while, in the bed of the hotel suite Cora had booked for us. It had been her specific instruction that I not sleep in my own apartment the night before, that I needed a night that was clean and separate, and she had been right. I lay there and I listened to her breathing from the other bed, and I thought about what it means to arrive somewhere you have been trying to get to for a long time. I got up quietly and went to the window. Nashville in early October, 6 in the morning, the city still gray and beginning. I stood there in my socks and I thought, today is mine. Not taken, not managed, not contingent on anyone's approval. Mine. Cora woke up at 7 and we had room service coffee and she did my hair, down with a few pieces pinned back the way I wanted it. And we didn't talk about my mother. We didn't talk about the video. We talked about the things you talk about when you are getting ready for a wedding. The shoes that were slightly too tight, the eyeliner that needed 3 attempts, the fact that Cora had memorized her reading and was still terrified she'd forget it the moment she stood up. When I put the dress on, Diane had been right. The repair was invisible. You could not see it at all from the outside. I could feel it. 2 fingers through the satin, right where the seam ran across my spine. I could feel exactly where the cut had been and where Diane had made it stronger than before. I kept my hand there for a moment. If you have ever had something broken and repaired in a way that made it more yours than it was before, if you know what it feels like to run your fingers over the place something was damaged and feel something other than loss, then you know what I felt standing in that hotel room in that dress. If that moment hit you somewhere real, hit that like button right now. And subscribe, because what happened after, what happened to my mother and to Bree and to the family I grew up in, that's what I need to tell you next. And I don't want you to miss it. I walked down an aisle toward Joel Whitfield at 11:23 in the morning on a Saturday in October, and he saw me at the top and his face did the thing faces do, that specific, unguarded thing that can't be performed. And I thought, this is what it was all for. Not the dress, not the repair, not the 2 weeks of surviving what came before. All of it. 31 years of holding my ground, of not bending when bending would have been easier, of staying true to something I couldn't always name. All of it had been aimed, without my knowing it, at this specific moment. This person. This morning. Bree was there. She sat on my side because it was the side she belonged on, and she came in a cream blazer, and she sat in the 3rd row, and when I walked past her, she had her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes were full. I didn't look away. I didn't perform anything toward her. No warmth, no coldness. I just saw her. The sister who had chosen the structure over the truth and was sitting here anyway, which was its own kind of beginning if she decided to make it one. Cora stood up to do her reading and she did not forget a single word. My mother was not there. She had told Bree the week before that she could not attend a wedding where she had been so publicly humiliated. I had not uninvited her. I want to be precise about that. The invitation had been sent 14 months ago, and it had never been rescinded. She chose not to come, and I spent exactly as long as it took me to walk to the end of that aisle being sad about it. The specific, clean sadness of grieving something that was never going to be what you needed it to be. And then I reached Joel, and I handed Cora my bouquet, and I was done being sad about it. Not forever, just for today. The vows were ours. We wrote them ourselves. Joel's were funny in the first half, and then devastatingly sincere in the second half, in a way that surprised everyone, including him, I think. Mine were short and specific, and I said one thing that I had not planned to say until I was standing there saying it. You are the first place I have ever been where I didn't have to brace. I heard Cora make a sound from behind me. Joel looked at me for a moment, and then he said quietly, in the space between us where only I could hear it, I know that. We were married at 11:41 in the morning. The consequences came the way consequences usually come for people like my mother. Not all at once, and not from anything I did. I learned most of it through Cora, who still lived close enough to Knoxville to hear things, and who called me on a Sunday evening about 3 weeks after the wedding with the particular tone she uses when she has information she's been sitting on for a few days, turning over, deciding whether to share. I'm going to tell you some things, she said, and I need you to tell me how you want to receive them. Do you want details or do you want the short version? I was sitting on the back porch of the house Joel and I had moved into 6 days after the wedding, a small craftsman in East Nashville with a yard that needed work and original hardwood floors that creaked in a way I already loved. I had a cup of tea going cold on the railing beside me. The October air was doing that thing it does when it's finally decided to be autumn. Details, I said. Patrice's employer, the regional insurance brokerage where she had worked for 19 years, had received enough contact from people who had seen the video that HR had called her in for a conversation. I don't know exactly what was said in that room. What I know is the outcome. She was moved from her client-facing role into an internal administrative position. Same title, different function entirely. No more client contact, no more representing the company externally. No more being the warm and capable face that walked into a room and made people feel taken care of. For a woman whose entire identity was built on being the capable one, the generous one, the one everyone trusted, that was not a small thing. That was the architecture of her self-image, quietly dismantled by a decision made in an HR office by people who had watched 37 seconds of video and drawn their own conclusions. I did not celebrate when Cora told me this. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. I think the honest version of this story requires me to tell you that my first feeling was not satisfaction. It was something closer to a dull, heavy sorrow. Because she had worked at that company for 19 years. Because she had been, in that context, genuinely good at her job. Because the consequences were real and they were landing on a real person, and that person was my mother, and I have never in my life found it simple to watch my mother hurt, even when the hurt was something she brought entirely on herself. Cora also told me that 2 women from Patrice's church, women she had lunched with regularly for years, women she had brought casseroles to and prayed alongside, and known in that particular intimate way of longtime church friendships, had quietly stopped including her. No confrontation, no conversation, just an absence where presence used to be. Patrice noticed within 2 weeks. She mentioned it to Bree, who mentioned it to Cora, who mentioned it to me, with a sadness in her voice that surprised me until I realized. Cora had wanted those women to be the kind of people who asked questions, who stayed and asked what was really true. Their leaving confirmed something about the fragility of the community my mother had spent decades building. That it was a community of surface, and surfaces don't hold when something real comes through. The one that broke her, though, the one I think she will carry longest, was her sister Carol. My Aunt Carol is 63 years old and lives in Chattanooga, and has spent most of her adult life existing peacefully on the periphery of our family, close enough to stay connected, but far enough to stay sane. She called Patrice the week after the video went viral. Cora heard about this call secondhand from my father, who had been in the other room. Carol said, "I always wondered, Patrice. I always wondered." 7 words. That was the whole of it. And according to my father, who is not a man who embellishes, my mother sat in the kitchen for a long time after that call without moving. I think about those 7 words more than I think about the HR decision or the church friends or any of the measurable external consequences. Because what Carol said wasn't accusation and it wasn't condemnation. It was witness. It was someone from outside the immediate family saying, "I saw something over all those years that I didn't have words for. Now I do." And I think that, being witnessed by someone she thought was safely in her corner, was the thing my mother had no defense prepared for. I did not call Carol. She sent me a card with a short note inside that said she wished me a long and happy marriage, and that she was sorry she hadn't said something sooner. I kept the card. It's in the drawer of my nightstand, and it will probably stay there. Bree called me 6 weeks after the wedding, not in the furious, efficient voice from before, in a different voice, quieter, less certain of its own footing. She said, "I started seeing someone, a therapist." I said, "Good." A pause. She's been asking me a lot of questions about growing up. I imagine she has. Another pause, longer this time. "I think I've been telling myself a story," she said, about what our family was, about what was normal." I sat with that. I let it exist without rushing toward it. "I know," I said. I'm not ready to say more than that yet," she said. "I just wanted you to know." "Okay," I said. "I'm here when you are." It was not reconciliation. I want to be clear about that. It was not an apology, and I did not treat it as one. What it was the beginning of a possibility. A door opened a crack by someone who had spent decades keeping it sealed, because the light on the other side was going to require her to look at things she wasn't ready to look at. She was starting to be ready. That was enough for now. It was more than I had expected, and I tried to hold it carefully, without gripping. My father still calls every 2 weeks. He still calls me Bug. We still talk around the edges of the things that matter most, and I have stopped being angry about that and started being grateful for the calls themselves. Some people only have so much room, and the kindest thing you can do is accept the room they have without resenting them for the room they don't. I don't have a relationship with my mother right now. I want to say that plainly. I did not make a dramatic announcement. I did not send a letter detailing every grievance. What I did was stop reaching. I stopped being the person who filled the silence, who called first, who smoothed the surface and made things workable. I stopped and the relationship stopped with me, which told me something about who had been holding it up all along. I wrote her a letter in November. I wrote it over 3 evenings at the kitchen table while Joel read in the next room, and the house made its new house sounds around me. I wrote it and rewrote it and eventually arrived at something that was not about winning, and was not about the video, and was not about the dress. It was about one thing. I mailed it on a Thursday morning on my way to work. I stood at the mailbox for a moment after I dropped it in. Then I walked to my car and drove to the office and designed a brand identity for a small coffee roastery in Germantown, and ate lunch at my desk, and came home and made dinner, and that was the day. Ordinary and entirely mine. I don't know if she read it. I don't know if she will. I told Joel what I had written, not the exact words but the shape of it, and he listened the way he listens, which is with his full attention and no advice unless I ask for it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That sounds like you." That was the response I needed, not because it was profound, because it was true. It sounded like me. For the first time in my life, I had said something to my mother that sounded entirely, without apology, like me. The central thing I said in that letter, the thing that took 3 evenings to find, was this. I spent 31 years making myself easier to love. I curved myself around your needs. I quieted myself in your presence. I made the evidence of my life smaller so it wouldn't feel like a challenge to you. I am not going to do that anymore. Not because I don't love you, but because I finally understand that making myself disappear was never going to make you feel safe enough to let me stay. Cora read it when I showed her, a few weeks later. She sat at my kitchen table with the paper in her hands and she read it twice. Then she set it down and she looked at me. "That's it," she said. "That's the whole thing, right there." I think she was right. It's a Tuesday morning in November as I'm telling you this. Early. The good kind of early, before the day has made any demands. I'm sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, and outside the window the yard needs raking and the sky is the particular flat gray of late autumn, and Joel is still asleep upstairs because he doesn't have a job site until 9. On the table in front of me is a photograph. Diane took it, the week after the wedding, in her workroom. A close-up of the back of the dress, the repaired seam. She sent it to me in an envelope with a note that said only, "For your records." I posted it on my Instagram the week after the wedding, the only thing I ever posted about any of this. The caption said, "Fixed. Better than before." I look at that photograph sometimes in the early morning when the house is quiet. I look at the seam, invisible from any distance, only legible if you know exactly where to look. And I think about what Diane said. Structurally, this seam is now stronger than it was before she cut it. I think about what it means to be stronger at the broken place. I think about the 13-year-old in the kitchen with the quilt, waiting for something that wasn't coming. I think about what I would say to her if I could, not to fix it because it doesn't need fixing anymore, but just to tell her, "You're going to keep making things. You're going to keep making things with your hands, and they are going to be real, and they are going to have bones, And one day someone is going to look at what you made and say, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." And they are going to mean it, and you are going to know they mean it, and that is going to be enough. More than enough. It is going to be everything. My name is Delaney Marsh. I'm 31 years old, and I am sitting in a house that is mine, in a life that is mine, in a morning that nobody has any claim on but me. That lands differently now. I hope you can feel the difference. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely, so stay with me for one more moment. Has someone in your life ever tried to make you smaller? Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, in a reasonable voice over a very long time. And have you ever had to decide between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? I want to know what that looked like for you. Leave it in the comments. Tell me as much or as little as you need to. I read every single one, and I mean that. And sometimes the most important thing is just knowing that someone is going to read it. If this story stayed with you, if something in it named something you've been carrying, hit that like button before you go. Subscribe so you're here for the next one. And share this with someone who needs to hear that the quiet harm is still harm, and that choosing yourself is not the same as being unkind. I'll be here. Take care of yourselves. I mean that too.